From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, Sherry. The best possible way to get into our show is her, then Andrew before that, of course, Peter and Chris Kenny at 5 o'clock. Straight after us, the late debate and Rita Panahi at 11 o'clock Eastern Daylight. Busy, busy night as always on Sky News. Without doubt, the rolled gold #1 non-negotiable promise of the Prime Minister before he became the Prime Minister was to cut your power bill.
$275, $275, $275, $275, $275, $275, $275, $275, $275.
Now, the reason for this promise was to try to come up with an answer to the problems that Bill Shorten couldn't answer in 2019. How much would the cost of the transition to a green economy be? Now, we all knew this was garbage at the time, but we can't pretend this wasn't the central promise. This is right up there with Tony Abbott saying that he would stop the boats. Yet, of course, this Prime Minister is not going to be able to deliver on the promise. We knew that was the case, but he's been able to generally play home games where the media, just happy that the new Labor wasn't going to repeat the mistakes of old Labor, basically pretended that they were going to be able to simultaneously spend $1 trillion, as the CSIRO told us, to change the electricity grid, but somehow this would bring down your prices. Now, of course, there was a giant asterisk here, which I always said was take the bill from just before the last election. If it's $275 lower than that, then OK, vote for Labor. But the likelihood is it's not going to be $275 for a whole bunch of very obvious reasons. There have not been 500,000 new jobs in the region. Over and over again, you can see the spin that the media put out there. Well, today was a very big day in terms of that promise. The Prime Minister was asked very directly in an interview on Adelaide Radio today about this policy, and he does not have an answer. Now, this should be big news, that the Prime Minister's central promise is now on the rocks, and now he is clearly walking away from it. Now, all of this comes, as I say, from 5AA, the radio station in Adelaide. And I'm going to take a couple of minutes here because I'm not just going to play you the little sliver that may well turn up on a 6 p.m. news, but I want to show you just how much lying is going on from the Prime Minister, who said 275 100 times more than the ones that we just showed you then. It's a rolled gold clear promise. Remember, if Tony Abbott promised to stop the boats and just walked away from it, after 18 months, how would the media react? Well, that's exactly how the media should be reacting to this appearance today on Adelaide Radio. First, the host, David Pempathy, sets up the interview with the Prime Minister.
Prime Minister, I mentioned the $275 power bill promise. Overwhelmingly, when we told our listeners at 6 a.m. today that you were coming on and invited them to send in questions and let us know what they wanted us to ask you, the number one thing people have been asking in the midst of the cost of living squeeze is, are they ever going to see that money, or is that promise now officially dead? So, Prime Minister's answer is?
We are doing what we can to lower energy prices, and we'll continue to do every effort to ensure that occurs.
So yes, no question. And when the Prime Minister uses anything other than yes or no, then you know that he is walking away from yes. This is as central a promise a politician has ever made in Australian politics. They claimed they had the modelling, they claimed they had the detail, and this was the promise that helped convince Australians that after wanting to break up with the previous government, that this was a government that they could trust with Australia's future. Again, no answer. So, David tries again.
It just doesn't feel like the vaunted benefits of this bold renewables future are trickling down in bill form to our listeners yet.
Because what we had was a war that led to, the Russian invasion of Ukraine led to a massive global spike.
Now, I'll get to the Ukraine stuff in a second. But again, the Prime Minister is clearly on the hook. The listeners of 5AA, the viewers of this program, and every Australian who participated in the last election needs to know, will 275 happen? Now, remember what the promise was. By 2025, $275. We're now making our way through 2024. There could be an election as early as this year, but most likely there might be one as late as the first few months of next year. So whether this promise gets delivered or not is the line in the sand. So the Prime Minister, again, wobbles around, doesn't answer, and here we go for a third time.
So is that why the cheque's not in the mail anymore, the $275?
Well, that occurred right around the world, and we're not immune from that, and that led to global spikes a lot higher.
I know. I guess what I'm trying to ask is,
occurred in Europe.
Factoring all that in, is anyone ever going to get the $275?
Well, what that was modelling on the transition that occurred on the basis that renewables are a cheaper form of new energy.
Now, those weasel words are massive. Pretending that the promise was based off modelling that has now been blown away because of the Ukraine war. You will have heard this talking point before, but there's a small moment of difficulty for the Prime Minister being able to tell that lie. You see, Putin invaded Ukraine in February of 2022. The Australian election was at the end of May in 2022. So if there were any potential shocks to global prices, the Labor Party would have walked away from the promise. But they didn't. Instead, they kept repeating the promise at media interview after media interview and speech after speech and ad after ad after ad, Facebook post after Facebook post. They were clear that even after the invasion of Ukraine, that the promise of $275 off a power bill will happen by 2025. We now are in the third week of February in 2024, and the Prime Minister has gone on radio in a capital city and is now walking away from the promise. Not just changing the subject, but now pretending that the promise doesn't count anymore because of the war in Ukraine, a war that started 2 months before the election. Now, we have an awful lot of people whose full-time job is to talk about politics. They have access to the keyboard to write the story, the camera to talk about it on television, or a microphone on radio. But apart from that conversation in Adelaide today, this was not a lead story. Now, the Prime Minister may well think that he can break promises and it doesn't matter. But when you promise a new version of politics, breaking something as fundamental as that, and we all know as fundamental as the tax situation was, and I still believe too little too late, tax cuts won't get him out of trouble. But this bloke, how many times do we have to prove is a liar? A liar who clearly used slippery tactics and the low road to get to the highest office in the country. Now, the idea that people will say the promise doesn't matter because nobody believed the promise, well, does that now mean that any politician can say whatever they want in the lead up to an election and there'll be no accountability after it? Now, I know there have been many times when Peter Dutton has tried to ask questions of the Prime Minister in Parliament, but he literally changes the subject. You don't get the opportunity to follow up like that radio interview did. You saw the Prime Minister not just crab walk, but completely slide away and then invent an excuse as to why this major promise will not be delivered. The challenge to anyone whose job it is to actually talk about politics is to actually, now that you've been made aware of this, ask the Prime Minister some questions about it. But of course, it's not as interesting as his many FM radio appearances, which he's been making, where it's all about Taylor Swift all the time. Now, again, the Prime Minister has every right to go on FM radio, and I understand FM radio doesn't work like Sky News Primetime or Radio National Breakfast, where we're going to start to have conversations about how many grains of sand there are. But when the promise is as clear as your power bills are going to go down by $275 and the bloke's not going to be able to deliver it, it's a question that FM radio in capital cities and regional areas would easily ask the Prime Minister. Watch him not answer it. But as I say, no headlines about this today, no follow-up, no features, no headline stories. Instead, for much of the day, people were simply running the government's spin about the vetting process of who comes into the country. Oh yeah, and by the way, about the Taylor Swift thing, well, he was asked by a listener today if he would hand over the tickets that he's got to the Taylor Swift concert in Sydney, and the Prime Minister, well, he kind of showed us the guy he really is, didn't he?
But what if you gave your ticket away to a real Swiftie fan?
Don't, Husey.
Like a real fan.
Don't.
I am a real Swiftie fan.
So the caller pleads with the Prime Minister to say, look, please, 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 I'll campaign, I'll do anything. He dodges and says the radio station might be able to give you the tickets. He doesn't give them away. Now, again, I'm not pretending it's a hanging offence. The Prime Minister's not handing over his tickets, but kind of a perfect metaphor, right? I know you're desperate. I know you really want it. I'm the Prime Minister. I could probably go to another one, but I'm going to this one, so bugger you. You're the idiot voter who thought that $275 was coming off their power bill. You're the idiot voter who thought there'd be no major changes when it came to tax policy. But nothing to see here.
Oh, Albo, I'm a huge fan of you, but I'm a bigger fan of Taylor. I would do anything for these tickets. I will campaign for you. What do you want from me? I swear to God, I lost my last ticket to Reputation due to a loser ex-boyfriend who, wasn't a Labor supporter.
Oh,
scumbag.
That was your first
and then he
mistake.
cheated on the internet.
You've got to ask them what way they vote early on.
I know. Young and silly,
Jodie was pretty clear with me.
Oh, really? Okay. What do you reckon, PM? Poor Natalie. Is she a chance
I've been crying for weeks.
She's been crying for weeks, PM.
Here we go. Here we go. Hang on.
I reckon Tute FM can sort you out.
You are.
Another attitude that comes from the top, from the people who have their cars paid for by us, the taxpayer, decisions made by those that have been in the Parliament for 20 years, like Chris Bowen, or even longer in the case of the current Prime Minister. Well, we have remained on the issue, as plenty have, and you know how important it is here, about exactly what types of cars we're going to be allowed to drive into the future. Now, Chris Bowen thinks that there's an electric future where there's the only cars that people will be wanting to buy. Places like the ACT are going to pass laws, in fact already have, that you can't buy a combustion engine after 2030. But the cars that Australians are buying right now, and by a margin of 2-1 over any other brand in the top 5, are, of course, the work utes of the Ford Ranger and the Toyota Hilux. You see, these are, for many people, a tool when it comes to work, or the best way to get your family around. Or, God forbid, you'd like to actually get out into the bush and do some camping. Well, more work is being done by Philip Curry. Again, I bet my house on this bloke when he says it's going to be happening, because he's been around for a while and he doesn't fall for the spin. There are way too many people in and around politics that are always playing for access, which means they never rock the boat. He couldn't care less. And he has reported on more detail of exactly what car companies are going to be in a world of pain as a result of Bowen's big car ban. Almost half of the nation's 20 top-selling vehicle manufacturers will have to make significant adjustments if they're going to survive the government's proposed vehicle emission standards, according to some modelling which has been handed to him by the nation's leading automotive groups. The Motor Traders Association, or the MTAA, modelling seeks to highlight the challenge that each manufacturer faces based on the current fleet mix, public information on car company plans, because remember there are plenty of people who buy in fleet, but they also obviously know what people like Toyota or Ford are planning to do for the next 2, 5 or even 10 years, plus a whole bunch of industry intelligence they have from both here and overseas. The boss of that organisation says that the 7 brands in the top 20, so the 7 most popular car brands in Australia, will start from next year already in trouble. They will be on the wrong side of Bowen's big red line. Mazda, Ford, Mitsubishi, Subaru, Isuzu and Nissan all face particularly tough challenges. In fact, if you have a look here, not even at utes, but at passenger cars, you can see that Mazda, Ford, Mitsubishi, Subaru, Isuzu, Nissan and LDV are all going to be on the wrong side of the climate targets from day one, meaning that they will either have to buy credits off electric vehicle companies or they will have to start offering electric vehicles in the market. But some of these companies, frankly, don't have them in right-hand drive and they don't have them here in Australia. But pay particular attention to Toyota and Mazda and Ford and Kia. Now, these are the main brands that Australians are purchasing. Now, that's when it comes to cars, four-door normal cars. What about light commercial vehicles, utes? Toyota, automatically in trouble. Mitsubishi, automatically in trouble. Nissan, automatically in trouble. GWM, automatically in trouble. Ram, automatically in trouble. SsangYong, Jeep, Chevrolet, all automatically in trouble. So the Prime Minister and Chris Bowen can tell us as much as they want that, oh, there's no ban on big trucks. But when that many of the top car companies in Australia are already going to be in a scenario where they will not be able to sell vehicles in Australia, forget about what's happening in 2035, 2030 or even 2028. The problems kick in as soon as next year. But the Prime Minister says, of course, nothing to see here. We're not banning anything. You can buy and drive whatever you want. Unless, of course, when it comes to a ute, and it happens to be a Toyota, a Mitsubishi, a Nissan, a Ram, a Jeep, and if you're trying to putt around in a four-door normal sedan, a Mazda, a Ford, a Mitsubishi, a Nissan. You see, these decisions are all made by people whose cars are paid for by us, the taxpayer, who've been politicians for a generation, 20 years in the case of Chris Bowen, way longer than that in terms of Anthony Albanese. These decisions are made by people who are unaffected by the decisions. Dare I say, a little bit like the lady who was desperate to go to the Taylor Swift concert, but the Prime Minister wants to go because, you know, it's good for the selfies. As long as he's taken care of, it's okay. Everyone else, go jump. But what does he always say?
My word is my bond.
Yeah, of course it is. What do we like to say? Pull the other one that plays jingle bells. Well, the Prime Minister thought that he was going to get his place in history rather than being a Prime Minister who constantly breaks promises and has made life harder for people. He, of course, believed that The Voice was going to get up last year. He spent $450 million arguing for what he believed would be his moment in history. He, in fact, campaigned in the dirt of Uluru, hoping that that would emotionally compel people to vote the way that he wanted to vote. But of course, when it comes to his understanding of the Northern Territory, and particularly Alice Springs, we know this bloke is the definition of a blow-in. He is an inner-city lefty who's got the inner-city lefty view about Indigenous issues. He doesn't have the actual view of people who live in areas with significant problems, particularly those in regional areas or Indigenous people in places like Alice Springs. Somebody who is the exact opposite is a Labor MP for the seat of Lingiari. Her name is Marion Scrimgeour. Now, she had previously come out and said at the early stages of The Voice that it was all garbage and it wasn't needed, but then, of course, she was pulled into line. But she's not staying silent and good on her, because she's talking about how the system deals, particularly with Indigenous kids, that the system proves to be guilty of youth crime in Alice Springs. She came forward with some amazing comments in an interview that she gave to the Australian newspaper Today, where she has actually had her own home broken into while she was sleeping last month, and she says that governments, both the Territory Labor and Federal Labor government, needed to make serious changes to Northern Territory youth justice laws. Here's what she says. There's got to be a rethink of how we deal with youth crime. A bit of tough love never hurt anyone. And I think that what's needed is to come to this equation. We've got to stop thinking that we're dealing with little angels here. When you look at these photos, they're laughing and smiling. They think it's a joke. And not because it's an accident, and an accident that could have got someone killed. We've got to stop pussyfooting around here and thinking that these kids are going and they're being taken home to responsible adults, because in a lot of cases there isn't a responsible adult there, and these kids don't listen. And she lives in Alice Springs. Albo flies in and out of Alice Springs for photo opportunities. Remember when things were particularly bad at the start of 2022? He spent more time flying to and from Alice Springs than he did in Alice Springs, only to then go down to Melbourne and spend 3 days at the tennis. Now, the reality is that if both Jacinta Nampijinpa Price, who lives in Alice Springs, from the country Liberal side of things, is saying it, and the local Labor MP is also saying it, then maybe they know what they're talking about. Maybe an attitude needs to change, and the inner city Radio National perspective of infantilising what happens in regional Australia should not be the way our public policy is set. But watch this space, it probably will be for a long time to come. Meantime, our old mate Marcia Langton. Remember Marcia Langton, of course, who was out there telling everyone that they were hard racist if they were part of the No campaign?
Then there's the hard no voters, and I'm hoping that they're about 20%, and they're the ones who are spewing the racism.
Well, of course, the result was a hard 60% of Australia that didn't just say no, but hell no. But of course, she wasn't talking about all of them. She was only talking about the people doing crazy things on the internet. Well, Marcia Langton, who argued for a change to the Constitution, is out in the press today saying that there should not have been a referendum until the voice had already existed. In fact, it was her belief that she agrees with the very former Prime Minister, Paul Keating, that the voice should have been put in legislation as soon as this government came to power, and after it was proven to work, then that was the opportunity to put it into the Constitution. Funnily enough, she, of course, never argued this publicly, did she? There was no conversation about that while it was all being put together. Instead, it was just, here's the idea, vote for it. If you don't like it, you must be a racist. If you have an argument against it, you must be a real racist. Australia, of course, made its decision, and no history to be achieved by the current Prime Minister. When it comes to youth crime in Queensland, it continues to be a horrific problem, and it is one that this government is not going to be able to spin its way out of. Now, the Labor government in Queensland will do everything they can to try to distract from the reality. They will ignore the victims. They will pretend that it is a beat-up. One of the local MPs in Townsville, of course, just refers to it all as some sort of LNP invention. But as we spent our time in Townsville last week for our town, anyone who stopped you in the street would talk about what is happening when it comes to youth crime. And, of course, don't expect Stephen Miles to be serious about it. He's a hardcore lefty. His doctorate, of course, is, among other things, in unionism. But he giggles at the mere suggestion of him putting emphasis on it in speeches. Instead, he doesn't want to talk about it because he knows they have made it worse. They can fiddle around the edges when it comes to how youth crime will go down in history. Remember, as we told you, 10% of all youth offending in Queensland is drug-related, and they've changed drug laws, which will mean magically there'll be a 10% fall in youth crime in the lead up to this election. Again, I hope the good people of Queensland see this for what it is, a government that has no idea what it is doing, that lies directly to your face and then laughs behind your back. Your job, of course, is to shut up, pay taxes and never question the people in power. Well, one of the things that is the truly dysfunctional part of what is happening when it comes to youth crime in Queensland and all around the country is when eventually the cops do arrest somebody and they get in front of a magistrate or a judge. Now, remember, the magistrates and judges are the ones who make the decisions about how much of the laws that the Parliament pass actually get implemented. In countries that don't have mandatory minimum sentences for several crimes, then you end up with a scenario where often no minimum sentence is handed over. Governments instead turn around and say, we've extended the maximum penalty to this high and 26 years beyond your death. But the reality is, if there is no set minimum, then the kid most likely will get away with it. And then we have a further attitude when it comes to youth crime about whether somebody whom police believe to be responsible for it, who may well have a serious criminal record, how many of those people are staying behind bars while things are being decided about their guilt or innocence, at the very least to be able to take these people off the streets so they cannot continue to commit the crimes. Well, today, Queensland Police came forward with a shocking series of statistics. Queensland magistrates have granted bail to young offenders against the request of police in 2/3 of cases. 2/3 the police have said, this is a bad person, they're probably going to do it again, or they've got a rap sheet as long as your arm, for goodness sake, please, take them off the street. 2/3 of the cases end up as a scenario where they simply get overruled. Giving evidence to a parliamentary inquiry, the Assistant Commissioner said that the courts have recently been denying bail. In the past 12 to 18 months, they are more likely to go against the recommendation of police. The Queensland Police Union is even tougher, where they say that we don't have a bail problem, we have a judge problem. Absolutely correct. And finally, while I know that the vast majority of Australians have no plan to go to a Taylor Swift concert anytime soon, and it is a little bit of an excessive obsession of the media. In fact, what was that poll that we showed you? That it was the best part of, 80, I think, % of people had no plans to go to a Taylor Swift concert or didn't even know who Taylor Swift was. But this is a big cultural event for lots of people, and I'm not going to piddle on it from a height. In fact, if you want to go, enjoy yourself. If you can get the Prime Minister's tickets, even better. But this thing's huge. I mean, look at the queues that are literally go hours and hours long. That's, by the way, not for tickets. That's to buy T-shirts, the merchandise for the concert. I know for my little girls who would like to go, they will settle for the T-shirt. But sadly, Daddy hasn't been able to get a couple of hours to wait. If anyone would like to send me something for a 9-year-old or a 6-year-old, feel free. Please, any connections that you have, I'll appreciate it. But there are always people who just are so snobby about whatever the big thing is, whatever the cool thing is, whatever the popular thing is. And wait till you see one of the snooty little takes that popped up in one of those far left bits of the internet that no one really reads, but someone sent it to me, so I had to show you. The Saturday paper, which, you know, is for the people who think that the Greens are too far right-wing. This was all about the exclusionary empowerment of Taylor Swift. You see, if you like her, you're part of a racist cult. In Swift's world, you do not have to feel guilt or shame about white privilege. You embrace it. In fact, Swift makes it permissible to buy into this world, and many are willing to go into debt to experience it. She is the sound of whiteness. She makes music that confirms whiteness for an audience large enough to be reassured by its whiteness. This might not be its intention, but it's certainly part of its attraction, especially in Australia. Seriously? The reason the kids are lining up for Taylor Swift is because it's some sort of secret white power thing. There's more. During her first show in Melbourne, she told the audience that songwriting was something that actually gets me through life. This may be true, but why then, after more than 3 decades on this planet, isn't she writing about the things the rest of us women in our 30s are grappling with, the climate emergency and being repeatedly failed by our political leaders, racial injustice and raging conflicts? Seriously? So she can't do anything about her skin colour. There is no exclusion as to whom her fans are around the world, but apparently she's not writing about the right things. One more before I throw up here. Swift is also emblematic of another obsession of white women. Goodness, it goes on. This politeness is a reinforcement of the status quo. There is no need to be difficult when everyone is already alike. In other words, it all works when everyone is a good white person. My girls love her, which means I'm aware of all of the upside of Taylor Swift. As a middle-aged bloke, not my thing. But screw you. Screw you for being such a pompous piece of work. Especially when somebody of any celebrity, and it could be your favourite sports star, your favourite pop star, your favourite person on TV. But for a lot of people, someone like a Taylor Swift literally means it was the light at the end of the tunnel to get through hospital. Here's a little girl that popped up on the internet in the past couple of days who explains how Taylor Swift helped her find a way through pretty serious illness.
Hi Taylor! I got diagnosed with cancer 2 years ago. First cannula was in my hand with my daddy Callum. Couldn't do most things because it was in his hand. Whenever her music goes on in the car, I just like to daydream about how cool she is and maybe things that I can't do. I can't sing like she can, but it's making me feel way better when her songs make me feel like I can do things.
What a cutie. For her, it's about hope. For wankers, it's about whiteness. For the rest of us, it's just something that people are having a good time with. Quick break, back with more here on Paul Murray Live, where we're going to talk about a bunch of lefties that turned up to Canberra today demanding new laws. So the climate crisis was at the centre of every decision that's ever made, ever. Hey, forgive me being slightly self-indulgent, but I know that she's watching, she's listening. Strength and love to Mum. She's going to have a big couple of days ahead. We're all thinking of her. We're all sending her our love, and we'll look forward to talking to her as the weekend rolls on. Love you, Mum. Love you, Wayne. All right, let's get straight into this now with none other than Michael Kroger, the Liberal power broker. I don't know which is the best way to do it. I just my mate Michael, right? But it's Liberal power broker, former Liberal president. You know, he's decided to ditch the collar. It's a comfortable Thursday evening in Melbourne. Let's just say our mate Michael. Linda Scott, of course, the councillor on the City of Sydney Council. She sits on National Cabinet, Labor to her bootstraps, hanging out with Albo at every chance she gets. But she's just our mate Linda. Hello, my friend.
Lovely to see you.
So, all right, that's the pleasant bit. Let's get to the tough bit. So Albo today's on the radio and pretty obviously starts to not just walk away like, you know, a rower at Oxford. He is just getting as far away from the 275 promise as he possibly can.
And we're not immune from that, and that led to global spikes a lot higher.
I know. I guess what I'm trying to ask is,
in Europe,
factoring all that in, is anyone ever going to get the $275?
Well, what that was modelling on the transition that occurred on the basis that renewables are a cheaper form of new energy.
Now, Pembo, of course, is a man who's been around for a while, edited some newspapers for a long period of time, and you can see on the look of his face, he's going, this bloke's bullshitting. This bloke is all over the shop. Sorry for the swear, boss. All right. Michael, if a promise as central as I will cut your power bills by $275 gets a crab walk like that, it should be news. But because the PM is doing the FM circuit and it's all tay-tay every day, there's nothing on this.
Great credit to David Penberthy for having the guts to, you know, have those follow-up questions and completely garrot Albo. So, mate, I'm just going to follow up your editorial. Bear with me for a second. I'm going to follow up your editorial where you said this bloke made this promise, but the Ukraine war had started beforehand. So the Ukraine war started on the 24th of February, right? Mm-hmm. And as you said, the election was in May. 3 months later, 21st of May, 3 months later. So what Albo's trying to say is, oh, we had this war and the price of oil went through the roof, and therefore, you know, the problem with you know, power bills, et cetera, well, you know, this was the Ukraine war.
It's garbage.
There is a great fallacy in this. It is complete garbage. Brent crude oil, Brent's the North Sea oil, right, up north of England. It's the oil field, that's why they call it Brent crude. When the Ukraine war started, mate, it was $93 US a barrel, okay, 93. It hit $123 on the 7th of March, okay? So 2 weeks after the war started, Brent crude went through the roof. Albo knew on the 7th of March that Brent crude price had gone through the roof. So by the time of the election, Brent crude had gone down to 113. Mm-hmm. But it had gone up already $20 from what it was before the war. So it went up 20, went up another 20, then went down 20. Bottom line, it had already gone up before the election, before Albo made his promise. He knew full well this promise was an absolute dishonest lie. It was a lie. He knows it. And if you're in any doubt, have a look at that childish waffle he goes on today on Penberthy's program. So, you know, shame on you, Albo, for misleading the entire country into thinking that a cost of living crisis could be easily dealt with. And here's an example of it. But the problem was that terrible war.
Well, and
all
exactly,
rubbish, mate.
Yeah, that Brent oil mark that you were talking about, I just checked right now, 82. Right, so way back from the heights of
$82, $82 today, correct.
Yeah, correct. All right.
It's less.
So Linda, this, I mean, you couldn't have a clearer promise. There's no asterisk, there's no slide. I know the best spin at the time the PMO probably would put on it is, oh, it's 275 off the peak, wholesale -2 on your leg. But that's not the promise that was made. It was absolute, it was clear. And sure, we're not at 2025 right now. But the PM didn't exactly look like a bloke who was even willing to repeat the number that he said however many times when Australians were hiring him for the job.
Well, look, of course, don't get me started on the sort of, remember John Howard, no, ever, GST, never, ever. I mean,
you had an election for it.
With the endless broken promises that the Liberals
Linda.
have made over decades. Michael
Linda.
Kroger, I'm sure you've been part of some of that policy formation. Promises have been made.
Linda,
and,
that's pathetic.
They've been
broken. That's pathetic,
What we have
Linda.
here is a government making decisions in the public interest, and that is clearly, you can find abundant evidence to show that moving to renewable energy, moving to the forms of energy that the federal government are doing are the cheapest forms of energy.
Once they're built.
Moving to other forms of energy, like nuclear energy, which is, of course, so favoured by Peter Dutton, they are the most expensive. They have a hugely long time frame, and they won't feed into the grid for many, many decades. And finally, and most relevantly, no one has an answer about where you will put the waste. So what the Albanese Labor government is doing is making a good decision in the public interest to transition to renewables. It's the best economic decision and it's the best decision for the environment. And that is what a good, responsible government should do.
Yeah, but forgive me, Michael. The lipstick on the pig, right? Because I've talked about this in great detail before, right? Which is to avoid what happened to Shorten, they invented this 275 thing, right? To avoid what happened to Shorten, they invented the 600,000 jobs, right? So all the media could run off and say, well, there's got an answer, but then they never hold into account for the answer. Everything that was personal about the last government is cyclical when it comes to this government, but even when the cycles have moved back towards their favour, like what we've been talking about tonight, and thank you for that detail before, again, it all just moves aside. Instead, I get it. Much of the media is left, but it is unbelievable the standards they will not apply to this bloke. They let this guy slide every time because they want the pack-a-whackers to his prime ministership.
Yep, that's why those laconic questions from Penberthy were just great. The sort of casual hand grenade, asking me the question that everyone on the ABC should have been asking him every single day since the election. This bloke knew that the promise he made was a vacuous promise. I've said to you before, can we see the modelling elbow? Can we see the modelling which gave you the confidence to say on 100 occasions you'd be 275 better off? Just release the modelling. And the coalition, if they haven't asked for it, should ask for the modelling. Perhaps someone in the Canberra Press Gallery might actually ask him for the modelling and we can look at it. Because, mate, those 100 promises weren't subject, by the way, Australian voters, to the following 15 things, if we can get this right. There was no asterisk. This was a promise. And the subliminal message, or not so subliminal message, was Morrison and Frydenberg have stuffed up cost of living. It's very easy to fix. Look, you get 275 straight away, off the top of our head in a year or so's time. You get that 275. That's not a problem. That's the message he gave. Now, if a company director, by the way, made a promise about forecast company profits that were based on the kind of negligible reasoning that Albo had, with no reasonable basis for making the promise, they'd be prosecuted by the regulator and go to jail, as they should. This bloke has made this promise on the flimsiest of evidence that we haven't even seen, and of course, never mentioned it since. So what a disgrace, and I hope my friends in the coalition in Canberra replay that 100 times between now and the election, because what Albanese did was win this election partly on that disgraceful con job.
So the Greens and Labor got together to establish a parliamentary committee which has now been taking evidence today from a bunch of very concerned climate activists that are young, who believe that the duty of care with regards to the decisions that are made that have consequences of potential issues in and around climate change should be front and centre in the responsibility of a federal government. One of the students who turned up there today said, "We are really trying to meet them where they are and change their attitude. You'll hear no argument from the government that has acted on climate change. We hope that the attitude that the government has done enough isn't a blocker to getting legislative protection specifically for young people." Linda, is there a duty of care that should be built into legislation for the next generation when it comes to climate change?
Well, look, when I talk to my children about this, we do have conversations about the implications of the behaviours of our generation and the generations before us and what that is going to mean for their future. And I really admire these young people. Good on them. You know, they're off down to Canberra, heading into their federal parliament and advocating for their generation. I think we can all kind of have a look at what they're proposing, and they're putting on the table some really interesting ideas. Obviously, we've seen some of these ideas adopted around the world into legislation about the idea that you have a duty of care to protect young people from further planetary change because of climate. I think it's just great to see young people honestly engaging with our parliament and engaging about the issues that matter to them. And it gives me a lot of hope for the future of Australia.
But, Michael, we all know parliamentary committees does not automatically mean anything changes. But what happens is that a parliamentary committee has thus recommended becomes the impetus for the need for change. Do you think that we're going to get a duty of care written into legislation as part of the price of Pocock support?
Well, I hope not, because each piece of legislation should be judged on its merits. What happens, by the way, if the government breaches that duty? We can have litigation against the government by these young people who pays the legal costs. What happens to the defensive shield of the Crown, etc., etc., etc.? So, no. Do I think this should happen? No. But should the government take into account you know, or any serious issue, any consequence of legislation, its effect on families, its effect on country people in the regions, etc., etc. So it's one of a number of factors that governments should take into account. But do I think there should be a specific provision for this? No, I do not.
Well, I mean, nobody would suggest this about the nation's finances, about debt that the future generations would have to pay. But, you know, you might get a hearing out of me on that. But anyway, let's get to winners and losers of the week. I went very long this evening with my opening thoughts, and particularly the Tay-Tay pushback, so forgive me. Linda, who's your winner or loser this week?
Well, look, clearly the winner is actually Taylor Swift. And, you know, the Prime Minister's going to see her. Thousands and thousands and thousands of other excited Australians are going to see her. So sadly, my family missed out, but, you know, I'm super enthusiastic to see all the Taylor Swift love around the inner city of Sydney. It's delightful. Loser of the week is again, of course, at the City of Sydney, sadly, Clover Moore. We spoke last time I was on here about the plaques going up in Sydney Park before the asbestos testing was done. Now, a week later, we know that the asbestos testing has done, and there was bonded asbestos indeed in that Glebe Park. Just a shocking outcome.
But there's a new plaque.
So many worried inner-city residents with kids playing in these parks. It's just shocking.
I'm with you. All right, quick one for me, Michael, because I've got a very special guest standing by next.
Loser of the week, Vladimir Putin, for obvious reasons. Winners of the week, all those young people that went to the Taylor Swift concert, 300,000 in Melbourne, and could have been more, but sadly they didn't know they were all white racists.
Yeah, what about that, the freaking Saturday paper? All right, love you guys. We'll see you all again next week.
They wouldn't have gone.
All right, quick break. After the break, one of my favourite humans who's getting behind a bloody big broom tomorrow, because supercars are back. My favourite sport is finally back, and we'll have a chat to David Reynolds after the break. Excited. The racing is back on this weekend, and you can watch it all on Fox Sports on KO, but I'll be there in person at Bathurst.
Paddle shift and ABS? Nah. This will be real drivers grabbing real gears as they feed 600 horses into their rear tyres.
Just a little bit excited, and a man who I'm sure is as well is none other than the loose unit and the great man and former Bathurst champion. He's not a former Bathurst, he's always a Bathurst champion. Our dear friend David Reynolds, who's joining Team 18 this year. Great man, here it is, no more mucking around. You're looking forward to just getting out there and hitting it as hard as you can this weekend?
Mate, I am very, very excited. I'm actually more excited to talk to you because I haven't talked to you for a while and I miss you, Paul.
I miss you too. How's the family? Let's catch up. How's the missus? How's the kids, mate? You enjoying being a double dad?
Yeah, I love it, mate. My family's really good, thanks. And I think my missus might be watching home, so hi, the moose, and I love her very much.
Hello, Moose.
I'll see you next week.
All right.
Yeah, back on racing, back on task. So yeah, really looking forward to this weekend. Got a new team, whole new crew to learn, and yeah, it's gonna be a fantastic week. I can't wait to get underway.
You and I hate BS as much as each other. As both of us hate BS, right? We both love each other. And often, sometimes when sporting contests, people go, oh, anyone could win, but really one person can win or two people are going to win. But the reality is this one is so open, right? We know the issues that are there with the former champ, that he's not going around again, at least at the start of this season. SVG's off to the United States. Whole bunch of people, new teams, new work that's happened off-season to make the cars even more level. So do you have a feeling that this is not as predetermined as previous seasons seem to be?
Yeah, that's correct. Like, you know, when you sit back and look at it, obviously Van Gisbergen's not here. Brody, last year's champion's not here to defend his title. The only two champions left in the category are Courtney and my new teammate Mark Winterbottom. So, you know, by the end of the year, we can see someone that's never been champion before take this out. So it's going to be a really, really close thing to watch. But, you know, at the end of the day, there's 24 drivers, and really, any one of us are that good enough, we can win. So, you know, it really comes down to the team. There's 33 races this year. It's going to be hectic. It's going to be hard work, and it's going to be hard fought. But it really comes down to the consistency of that driver or that team to sort of produce the best car and the best combination week in, week out.
Now, there must be something really fun about being able to start at Bathurst, because you've had the best of it, you've had the worst of it, but this isn't 1,000 kilometres. It's a race on Saturday, it's a race on Sunday, which means you can kind of take it the way you would a normal race, but it still is, you know, the best joint in town. How do you feel about the first race being where the grand final is generally played?
Yeah, it's a funny feeling, to be honest. Like, I don't really know. We've done it before a few years ago, and to be honest, I love the Newcastle 500 race. That was like one of my favourite street tracks to go to. But I also love Bathurst itself. Like, anytime you get to drive Bathurst, it's like awesome. I was here last week in an AMG Mercedes doing the Bathurst 12-hour and had like such a good week. But you know, it's just different. Like, you know, the 1,000 is so special in our hearts for motor racing that, you know, anything else around, if we do something else during the year, I don't know if it's going to take it away from that. But, you know, as a driver, I don't care. I could race at this track every week and still be a big smile on my face. So, yeah, that's what we sort of go into this race thinking about, because, you know, it is the coolest track on the globe. So I don't care if it's a 2K race or 2,000K race. You're going to love it.
And you know there'll be a big fat bearded bloke who's got a grin from ear to ear, cheering you on and looking forward to watching you on the telly, but certainly in person this weekend, mate. All the best. I'll drop in and say good day to you in the garage. All the best, mate. We love you, Davey. And
thanks,
everyone,
mate. Please
check
come
it out.
say good day.
I bloody oath I will. I'll join you in a nice bar.
You, mate. Like, it's been too long.
Way too long. Love you, brother. Take care.
Man. See you soon. Bye.
How good is he? David Reynolds is with the Team 18 team this year. Follow him on all the socials. Listen to everything he's got to do. He's a wonderful bloke. I love car racing, and it is on from tomorrow. You'll be able to see some stuff on Fox Sports. But the real action is there Saturday and Sunday. If you can get trackside, plenty of tickets still available. And buy as many as you can and bring people with you, because it is awesome. See you on Murray's Corner. All right, before we go, geez, I'm excited to get to the racing. Davey's a good guy, and he's going to be in a Chevy this year. It's going to be good to see. All right, now, let's remind you that we've got the pub test Monday night. We are going to be in Frankston for ahead of the Dunkley by-election. The major candidates have been invited. I think that's code for saying some aren't getting back to us. But there will be an empty chair right up until when we're on the air if they'd like to. Labor Party. Feel free. Pub test at skynews.com.au if you would like to join us. Please be in the local area. As many people as possible. I reckon we've got 10 seats left. Let's fill them tonight, okay? Pub test at skynews.com.au. Pub test at skynews.com.au. You know how Joe Biden is the only president in history to defy gravity by falling up the stairs? And literally he does physical therapy to avoid doing it. He's wearing special shoes, and they even let him go up the kids' stairs at the back. Guess what happened today? He tripped again. Okay. Please don't fall. Please don't fall. Please don't fall. I'm not entirely sure what... If he can't go up the big stairs and he can't go up the little stairs, what is he going to do? Is he going to have to hold on like those people tried to when the Americans were leaving Afghanistan? Oh, that's right. That didn't work out, did it? Go Joe Biden. Enjoy your weekend. Go Yankees, go Tigers, and go Chevy.